everyone, and welcome to this conversation presented by White House Custom Color. I'm Jed Toffer. Thanks for listening. You know, my wife Vicki and I have owned and operated our photography studio, V Gallery, for 20 years now. White House has been our lab for the last 16 of those years, and we could not be happier. White House is a family-run business, just like ours. If you haven't already, check them out at whcc.com. And if you want to drop me a line, feel free to email me at jed@whcc.com. You know those conversations where you start off going down one path and it turns into something you never saw coming? Brooke Shaden and I sat together again to talk about what is weird. We also wanted to cover the concept of selling out and some other things, and we did that. But with Brooke, you always get more than you bargain for. She's very adept at under-promising and over-delivering. She's also wise beyond her years. An old soul, so to speak. And for me, that means she always has something new for me to learn. So yeah, we discussed the concept of what weird is, among many other things. And as happened many times before, I walk away with some fresh perspectives. I think you will too. Stay home, friends, and stay safe. This too shall pass. So, fair enough that you have people, right?
Yeah.
Who are your people?
Curious people who want to dig deeper for their art and themselves.
Where do you find those people? Like if you're going to go to we're at WPPI, but if you're going to go to a thing, where are those people? Where are your people at?
I try to be as loud as I can about who I am so that they find me.
So your people come to you.
Yeah.
You don't have a place in mind where you go and find them.
No.
They come to you.
Yeah. Well, I think that, like weird is attracted to weird. So when you're weird enough and loud enough about it, then people find that pretty easily.
There's going to be some tangents here today. When you say things, it makes me want to... What's weird?
Honestly, I think that weird is authentic. I just think that it's something...
Because being authentic is so weird.
It is. Like, following your true curiosity is weird. Most people don't do that because we get into some very specific way of working or thinking or creating, and then you have to do that to make a living, and then you don't do anything else because you feel stuck, just like any job. So it's weirder to follow your true curiosity than to... not.
As opposed to going with the flow, so to speak, or like doing what it is that you think society or your group or your culture or your tribe or wherever you happen to be located.
Yeah.
Whatever they think is normal.
Right. Because like the number one thing that I hear at workshops that I teach, for example, are people saying, I would love to do this, but, and there's always that but, and that's the track that they go down most of the time is like, but I have to make a living, or but this won't sell, or but I can't do this. And so the people who actually do it are the weird ones, the minority group who take the chance.
Now I'm going to play devil's advocate a little bit. If it's society or whatever the culture or whatever the group that they're a part of determines the norm, does that not generally justify their fears in that that's also going to determine what sells?
Yes, I completely agree.
So their fear is justified.
In a sense. But I think that we are too quick to assume that we need the masses to support us, but we don't.
Oh, yeah.
I have a very small group of people who support me, but they really support me.
Right. I read just this. Now, this made me think of something else related to this just the other day. And when I say that, it's probably 2 months. So 2 or 3 months ago, I read an article that said you need 1,000 people. 1,000.
To do what?
To succeed and to be supported. Like, I think this was for like YouTube.
Okay.
Or maybe it wasn't even for YouTube. It was for, I think it was for what you're talking about. Like people that are going to support you. Now that means financially. If you're selling something, if you have something to sell or something to offer, you don't need
thousands and thousands and thousands. You need 1,000 people in your client base, so to speak.
Interesting.
Because I think a lot, and maybe this goes back to what you were saying, is that I think a lot of people think, well, in order to be successful, I'm going to need all these people to love me. Like everyone's going to have to want what I offer.
Yeah.
But you don't need that.
No.
You need and they put a number on it. They put 1,000 people on it.
Yeah.
Like over the course of time.
Right.
And I would guess that depending on what it is that you're offering, maybe you even need less than that.
Yeah. And I'm also curious, in my experience at least, the more people who hate what I do really fuel the people who love what I do, you know? So it's like the more controversy there is, like the people who really love it are much more inclined to love it even more, because it's like there's this feeling of I'm going against the grain, or like I need to stand up for this art or this person. And so I find that even like I do a lot of things that are controversial in a lot of ways, and I
Like
hear
what?
from people.
Just tell me what.
Well, you know, years ago, actually, I talked to you about this death series that I'm creating.
You did.
Yeah, and because you were like my go-to person of how will the public respond.
Okay.
And you were correct. I mean, you had a response that echoed what a lot of people feel, which is, you know, like maybe you shouldn't be like taking pictures with dead animals, and maybe you shouldn't be, you know, using, you know, human remains to
real stuff.
Yeah. And
metaphorically, I didn't have a problem with the metaphor.
No,
I think death is actually something that's really important to talk about.
Yeah.
And to convey through your art.
Right.
But the real stuff is what was getting to me.
Yes, exactly. And
at
that's
the same
what gets
time,
to
though,
people.
in my defense, because I feel as though I need to defend myself.
Defend yourself
right now.
Yeah.
I respect I feel like I respect your desire for, here's the word again, authenticity. Isn't that kind of where you were coming from?
Yes, and that's why I asked your opinion in the first place, because I knew that you would respect me no matter what.
Oh, well, I do, yes. But that's the piece that I heard when you were asking me about it initially, is that you felt as though, considering how important the subject was, that the authenticity be there.
Yes.
And you wanted to remain true to that.
Yeah, exactly.
And you did that, and you got some flack.
Just a little, though. That's the thing.
Not bad.
No, not bad. And I almost feel like part of me just wants to create controversy now because I can't.
I was going to ask you that.
Which is not a good thing to admit. Like, I'm not proud that I want to do that. But at the same time, I started my career with a lot of controversial images. And people were really upset about it. And I haven't been able to do that since then. I kind of feel like the internet as a whole has just softened. Like, people aren't as upset about the same stuff that they were 10 years ago when I started creating.
Well, what does that mean? Softened? Yeah. Like,
they've become jaded. I don't know.
You can get away with more?
Yeah.
Is that?
Because I wasn't doing anything crazy when I started photography. I was just playing dead in different places, essentially. And I was amazed at how people really were upset by that. And I do the same thing now, but nobody says anything about it. It's like, oh, okay. Like, we get it. We've seen that.
But the part that you say, like, you want controversy, is that because that's what gives you recognition?
Well, it's mostly because I want to make people feel strongly. And it's frustrating when you're trying so hard to make things that really say something about the world and about humanity, and then it just washes right over people. And
you're in a war against apathy.
Yes, completely.
You are fighting apathy.
I like that.
I think apathy is the worst. I really do.
It is. It is, and it's frustrating because what I want to do with my art is get people to dig down past that and figure out if they can understand a deeper part of themselves, but most people are just not willing to do that.
Well, you're not really looking for controversy as much as you're fine with controversy as long as it comes with real emotion.
Yes, exactly. And that's why controversy is the wrong word. I'm just looking for a real experience from people.
A real reaction, something genuine.
Exactly.
Even if it's not happy.
Yeah, which I honestly love. I find a lot of value in negative opinions about my work because I'm very much of the opinion that once you've created something and you've put it out there in the world, it's not yours anymore. Like it belongs to everybody. And so I think that any opinion, good or bad, elevates the art in some way. And I find it more and more difficult to get those reactions from people.
But when someone's unhappy, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad opinion too, right? Like if you create something that upsets me, I've seen things that you've created that upset me.
Yeah.
And I don't mean offense. I'm trying to pick my words carefully here. But you create something and I look at it and I feel, well, what could I feel? Afraid or angry or confused, all those, or a combination of those things. That doesn't necessarily mean that my reaction to it is a bad one.
Right.
I could treat you bad, even if I looked at something you made and felt good about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But what you're wanting is just that the genuine, whatever it is that somebody really feels.
Yeah.
And the worst thing is that if someone doesn't feel anything or doesn't care.
It's the worst.
Right.
And I think most people agree with that. Like most people who are sharing their work online or anywhere, the worst thing that they hear is silence. And all they want is for somebody to just say something to know that it's been seen by somebody. But, I had a really great full circle moment recently in regard to people having negative opinions about my work. Because maybe like 5 years ago, somebody wrote to me.
You mean like and so this is a negative opinion.
Yeah.
And they're not just like feeling an emotion that's, anger or fear, but they're upset at you.
Yes, they were upset with me. And they wrote me an email saying, I'm upset that you created this. I don't think this should be out there in the world. That kind of thing. And I didn't think much of it because those opinions, it's like, okay, well, I did it and it's there and, and I feel okay about that. So I kind of let it go. It didn't really matter. But then 3 years later, this guy stayed after a lecture I gave and came up to me at the end of the lecture. And he said, I just need to apologize because I wrote you a horrible email 3 years ago.
It was the guy.
It was the guy. And he said, I was just going through an awful time in my life and I couldn't understand why you would create this art. But since then, it's actually helped me heal from that experience. And so that was like the most amazing, validating thing. And it reminded me that even if somebody has a negative opinion about me or my work, that doesn't mean that later on that will change. So it's good to remember that.
But see, you bring up another really good point that I think is interesting. There's a huge difference between someone having a negative opinion about your work and someone having a negative opinion about you, in my opinion.
And I struggle desperately with that.
Well, here's the rub. Your work is so much a big part of who you are, right? But it's not who you are.
Right.
It's not you. It's your work. And yet it is, you are really putting yourself out there through your work. So how do you reconcile that? How do you, I'm just coming to terms with this myself right now. If somebody's upset about something that you created, does it not follow that then they could be upset with you as a person?
Right. Well, here's the thing is that I create from a very pulled back analytical standpoint. So when I'm feeling an emotion, I don't create in that moment from that emotion ever. Like I'm not creating any autobiographical works where I'm feeling the distress of the moment and then I make something from that. So I always wait until I've analyzed the situation and I understand how I feel about it and I've really looked at all sides so that when I put that work out there, I've already gone through that hard work of figuring out how I feel about it from that pulled back vantage point. And that helps so much when people have negative opinions about it.
You don't ever just fly by the seat of your pants and if you're angry about something, just make something that...
No.
Really?
No, I lay on my couch and I watch Doctor Who and then I wait until I feel better about it. Honestly, it's just not the way that I work.
You are an analytical person.
I'm very analytical.
Aren't you?
And I'm also very emotional. That's the thing, is that I feel a lot, but I don't feel compelled to create because I understand that I don't understand yet what I'm feeling totally. And I like to understand that first.
So you wait.
I always wait, yeah. And, you know, the one time that I didn't was when I started this series about death and grief. And I was in this cycle of grief that I wanted to get out of. And I thought, this feels important. I should make something about this. And I started, and for a year and a half, I couldn't make anything. I just kept trying, and everything failed. And I hated everything that I made. And it wasn't until I finally felt like I was out of that cycle of grief that I understood it. And then I started the series all over again, and it was beautiful. So that's how I work.
What about when you make something that you hate that other people love, or do they just not see that stuff? Do you not?
They don't really see that. But, you know, but the other thing is that I release a lot of stuff that I'm not totally convinced about. So it's not that I hate it or whatever, but it's that I'm not convinced it's my best work, but I'm also not striving to create my best work all the time. Most people are on this mission to always produce amazing stuff, and I'm not. Like, I just want to produce stuff because it's fun. And if people want to see that, great. And
is it a quantity over quality thing, or is it you just always want to be creating and realize that you can't always be at the top of your game?
Yeah, well, the thought process is I enjoyed making this thing. And even if it's not the best, I'd rather release that and just say this isn't my best and that I'm aware of that, and then inspire other people to create even if it's not their best. I feel like that's way more valuable than just always showing all the perfect stuff that I make and then trying to act like that's all I do.
So is that what you want from, okay, we'll go back to your people. And I'll use the word weird again, meaning that it's just not, it's based on being curious, right?
Yes.
And so is that what you want for your people, so to speak?
Yes.
You want them to create and be okay with thinking this isn't my best work.
Yes. Because I think that translates into all parts of your life. Like, isn't it better to just try something even if you're not going to succeed and know that you've made a step forward in that regard? And I think, especially with art, we have this idea of perfectionism around it, where it has to be perfect and every detail has to be great. And it's almost like you've made something, now there's no opportunity to make it again. Like, that's it, you've done it, it has to be great. But we have infinite opportunities to just try again if it doesn't work out. And why do we hide that from the public? Like, why is it that we feel like we can't share that as well? It's equally, if not a way larger part of the process.
You're like sharing the process, even.
Yeah. And I think that's really valuable. And I'm not saying if people don't share that makes them bad. But I mean, that's not my point at all. But my mission in life, like what I want my legacy to be, is to inspire people to create, to get themselves out of any darkness that they feel and to be able to express that. And I feel like I try to do that with my work. And I have in part succeeded at helping people through dark times just by looking at what I've done. But I want them then to take that next step to do it for themselves and then therefore continue to inspire others.
You want to help people to come out of darkness. But I thought you liked darkness.
I love it. I want people to understand it. I don't need them to necessarily like leave it behind. I just want people to come to a greater acceptance of darkness.
Okay. See, this is the thing. This conversation is like a 3-year conversation between you and me.
Yes, it is. Really longer, I would argue.
Maybe, yeah, sure. Well, probably, yeah. Someday you're going to have to help me understand that a little bit more, I think. But in the meantime, I do want to stay on this topic because you posted something about masks, right?
Yeah.
And how this happened initially is that you were talking about selling out.
Yes.
And you've been talking about identity. I want to dive in. I want to take a deeper dive into all of that.
Yes.
So start with the selling out piece for now.
I've always had a really weird relationship with this idea of selling out because when I started my career, I wanted to be a really serious artist. And so the idea of selling out was like, oh, I won't do this, I won't do that. I can't be seen as somebody who just wants to make money through my art.
That's what selling out is.
Which is not really the actual definition of selling out, but I think that's how we see it.
I'm asking more than anything.
From a jealous standpoint a lot of the time. And the real definition is somebody who compromises their morality or their ethics in order to make money or profit somehow. But the way that we see it as artists is, oh, well, that artist is out, like they moved to Hollywood and they're doing all this stuff and they're making so much money. Right, exactly. And so my point is not that, I'm not trying to redefine selling out. I'm trying to say that we as a society see it in the wrong way a lot of the times. We
Right.
use it in the wrong
Well, and
way.
I think you just mentioned this, but that's fueled by envy,
Right.
isn't it?
Yes, and I really think it is. And for me, it certainly was. I really struggled with jealousy a lot when I started my career, and I had a hard time looking at other artists and trying to reconcile where I was in my career versus where other people were, which I think is very normal, but I recognized it was very unhealthy. And I started to assign this term sellout to people that were successful because I wasn't successful.
Oh,
And I see this happening all the time in our industry.
you were bitter.
I was bitter, yeah.
So you don't struggle with that anymore?
No. And I've worked for a long time not to, because
Sure.
it was a huge part of my identity. I mean,
Right.
I would have said I'm a very jealous person, and I always was my whole life.
Yeah.
And it's not like there aren't times where I have envy and I wish that I could be that person
Right,
or something.
right.
But for the most part, I'm really happy to watch people succeed, and I recognize that I'm not going to start failing because they're succeeding.
But how much of that is also because you are, in a sense, and you can debate me on this one, but how much of it is because, in a sense, you're on the other side of success now?
I don't know. And I think
That's
about
an
this
honest answer.
all the time.
That's an honest answer.
Yeah, it is. And I've really thought, especially even since you reached out about this topic, I've been
Yeah.
thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know. It's hard to say, like, when that switch happens, like when you feel like you're on the other side of success and then suddenly you feel like you can't be brought down because of that. I don't know. And I don't even have an answer to that. So it's a tough question.
Well, that's what goes through my mind, because I'm always stunned by really wealthy people that tell people that aren't really wealthy all kinds of advice
Yes.
about how, like money advice. Now, that's not to say that they don't have, valid points,
Right.
But when they're talking about fear, and when they're talking about, all these different things that from a financial standpoint they shouldn't have, like if you're a billionaire and you're worried about money, maybe there's like a psychosis type of thing going on there. But for you to go to somebody that's, struggling on, $6 an hour or $12 an hour or wherever, someone, like a single mother that's really struggling, and you're giving them advice about fear and money.
Yes.
Well, that's really easy for you to say.
Yes.
Do you know what I'm saying?
I completely know what you're saying. Yeah.
And so for you to be successful and then say, well, I don't struggle with the bitterness or the jealousy anymore, right? Doesn't that fit? Well, of course you don't, because you're there.
Yes.
You made it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And it is a very difficult thing to reconcile. And I know that in my journey, I recognized my jealousy right away. And I said, I can't act like this toward other people because it's bringing me down and it's not helping me at all.
Right.
And I started to try to change it before I would argue that I had any success at all. And I don't know how successful I was because I can't remember how I was feeling that long ago.
Sure.
But at the same time, I think there is a lot of good in accepting people wherever they are and recognizing that we can probably be mutually beneficial to one another. And sometimes it honestly helps me to be selfish in those moments and say, well, that person can help me just like I can help them.
Sure.
And so it helps you to not feel bitter toward that person so much.
I understand that piece. So in regards to the selling out piece, you don't look at it the same as you used to?
I don't look at it the same because I used to see anybody who made a lot of money
As a sellout.
As a sellout.
Right.
And I think a lot of people do.
Right.
And when I shared that on my social media sites, I got a lot of messages from people saying, well, that's easy for you to say because
you
you're a
did.
sellout, you know?
Really?
Yeah. And people saying, well, you're sponsored by Sony. Doesn't that make you a sellout? Well, you work with brands, so
Right.
aren't you a sellout?
Right.
And it was just a really interesting conversation because they were clearly coming at it from that standpoint of you're successful, so you're a sellout.
Right.
And I was trying to make this point of like, we need to stop using that word in this way
Right.
because I haven't compromised my morals for the things that I have.
Well, in that sense, it's a pretty big claim then. I mean, you're really making a pretty powerful judgment if you look at somebody and say you're a sellout.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you're wrong.
Right.
Because maybe they are.
Yeah, who
But the
knows?
point is there's a lot of weight behind that claim.
There is a lot of weight, and I think that it's in part why this starving artist mentality is still around, because we expect artists to be humble and to have to work really hard for everything that they have, and you can't have brand affiliations, and you can't have, like the corporations behind you if you're making authentic art. It's like those two things can't happen at the same time.
Right.
And especially in the fine art world, it's a huge issue with people thinking that.
Right.
And I just think that's the reason why artists feel like they can't make money, and that's why we have such a negative money mindset in the fine art world because of that.
In the fine art world, though, is the buying public that way? Are the people that purchase fine art looking for somebody that shows up in rags?
I don't know that, but I think that what they're looking for is somebody who is so wrapped up in their own creative process that they don't have time for companies. You know what I mean? Like there's this, they don't have to be poor, they don't have to be in rags, but I think that there's this romantic sense of like an artist who slaves away in a warehouse all day, just like making art, and they're so invested in that. And
well, maybe a corporation bought that warehouse.
Well, exactly. And that's the thing is sometimes it's all about posturing and just making it look like that's what you're doing. And but every single successful artist I know has money behind them, whether it's from, I don't know, like massive success of their own art or companies behind them or something. I don't know one single person who's successful without that.
Isn't that part of the game? I mean, isn't the part of the game? And I don't mean the game in art. I mean the game of life. You have to have money to do things.
Yeah, and people are always saying artists are so bad at business because so many artists repel that idea.
Sure.
But I love that idea. I mean, I am just as creative when I'm writing a proposal for a grant as I am making art. And I think it's the reason why I found any success, because I love the business side of things. I love it. I think it's fascinating.
Creativity in business. Mm-hmm. Heck yes.
Yeah. And I've seen so many people teaching business classes that are all about here's how you do pricing and here's how you make sales and stuff like that. And that's great. But what if we could really get behind the creativity of business and figure out how from the ground up, from the inside out, we can make a business that is sustainable and fulfilling and creative? That's what creates success in the long run.
I spoke to somebody a few months ago, and on the podcast, he talked about we're creative in all kinds of things that we do. He said a lot of times we're not even thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like he said, you can be creative when you're making a spreadsheet.
Right.
And it kind of blew my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I don't make that association. It's certainly not off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But he's absolutely right, and it's what I'm hearing you say right now too.
Yes, I love every part of my business except for taxes, which I think is fair. I feel like I haven't quite gotten the creativity there. But
some people choose to be creative with their taxes too.
True. Maybe I'm just not trying hard enough.
Maybe it's because you have morals and ethics and scruples and everything else that prevents you from being creative with your taxes. The other piece I wanted to touch on that kind of lines up with this is the masks piece, because you just had a post on masks that I noticed, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like, all right, let me ask it this way. Is wearing a mask always a bad thing?
No, I don't think so. Masks and identity it's so interesting because we think of identity as one thing. Like we are this identity, but we're not. We're constantly morphing into some other identity which will then morph into something else. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we try on different identities and figure out who we are is part of who we are. That's part of this many multifaceted force of being. And I think that there's an idea that if you're being somebody that you're not authentically, who that person is, that you're doing something wrong, when really you're just trying to figure out who you are. And it's constant. We will never know. It's not like our face mask will finally settle into some form and that's who we're going to be. It's like that doesn't happen.
Right.
So I think it's an interesting conversation because identity is not a singular thing that we're trying to attain.
Identity is not a singular thing. All right, help me out a little bit with what you're saying.
It's sort of Like 10 years ago, I wanted to be a photographer.
Yes.
And I was convinced of that.
Right.
And I tried so hard at that. And I told everybody that I was a photographer. And now I completely reject that title because
You
I
do?
don't feel like I'm a photographer
Okay.
anymore. Yes, I use a camera, fine. But I've realized that my heart is not in that art form. It's in art in general, sure. But and so that's a mask that I wore for a long time, really trying to fit into that until I realized that I've really moved out of that phase of my life largely. And I think that it's so important for people to find that mask, like that job title or that adjective that really describes who they are, and then stick with that. But that's, in my opinion, the way that we create narratives about ourselves that are unhealthy, that trap us in the past instead of letting us move forward into the future. And a lot of those narratives are very unhealthy for people. Like I grew up thinking that I was really dumb. Like I always thought that I was really bad at school. I didn't
Really?
get into any good colleges. I tried so hard and just couldn't succeed. And so my identity was wrapped up in stupidity. And I would make jokes about it all the time. Like, I'm so dumb. I'm so dumb. And by saying that all the time and making a joke out of it, that was my identity for a really long time. And I couldn't see myself in any other way. So we go through these phases of wearing these masks that we hold on to so tightly because that's who we've always been, and it's scary not to. But we need to learn that, well, that identity, that mask, whatever, will continue to change, and we can grow out of it, and that's okay.
How did you learn that with the stupidity thing?
It was actually an amazing moment that really solidified it for me. I was on stage giving a lecture one time, and I did something like I tripped over a cord or something, and I said, "I'm so stupid," and it was just like a moment. I passed
you
it.
said it.
I said it,
Yeah.
but I was. In my mind, I was just being silly, like,
Yeah.
just entertaining the crowd or whatever.
Right.
And I got off stage, and this brilliant photographer named Katrine Eisman, she pulled me aside and she really got in my face, and she was like, "You told that whole crowd that you're stupid, and if you tell them something, they're gonna believe you. So never say that again."
Oh.
And it was like this moment of, oh my gosh, I didn't even think about it. It was so part of just the joke of
Right.
myself that I just said
Right.
it, and I never said it again after that. I catch myself now. Every time I want to say, oh, that was dumb, or I did something stupid, I think, no. That was just a moment that I had, and now I'm going to move on from it. And
That's sobering. Like she got,
yeah, it was an amazing moment, and we
Right.
all need that. But
Right.
but most people don't have the guts to say that to somebody. Like,
sure, there's that piece.
Yeah, it's
Right.
difficult to go up to someone and say, "Don't say that you're fat. You're not." Like
Right.
that's a story you're telling yourself, and it's
Right.
hard to say that to people.
Right.
But I wish more people would, because it was an amazing moment.
It worked.
Yeah. And so now, honestly, I get in front of crowds and I tell them how incredibly intelligent I am. And I do it all the time now. And it's really affirming. And then, of course, they see me that way if I say it. So
Where's the line between that and bragging?
I think that the line is understanding where your strengths are and understanding where your weaknesses are. And I mean, I can tell you that I'm not good at school. And that's a fact. That's not my opinion. I almost failed school.
You're not putting yourself down.
No, I'm not. And so the difference is I can say I am really intelligent in business. I really understand concepts and symbolism in art. I'm really good at those things. I am not so good at taking tests and learning different skills and stuff like that. But I understand the difference, and I'm not saying I am stupid. I'm saying I just happen to not be good at that thing, but I'm great at other things. And it's good to make that differentiation.
When keeping all that in mind, when is wearing a mask not helpful, or when is it bad, or when is it? When should you take the mask off?
I think the moment you recognize it as a mask is the moment that it shouldn't be there anymore.
see.
I mean, the moment that you have that sense that I am inhabiting a persona that really doesn't align with my values, then you have to let it go.
Well, and that's kind of that usually occurs during the whole transition of identity in the first place. Like, I'm trying to be this person.
Yeah.
Or I'm trying to be this way.
Right.
And it's not working because it's not really me.
Yeah.
And so you come out of that then. And sometimes people get stuck there
Yes.
and they keep trying to be someone or do something that's not really them.
Yeah.
And you're saying, come out of that.
Yeah, let it go. And that's the difficult part. And it's hard because we don't think about it like this. Like, we're having a conversation about identity that most people will never have, right? Like, most people don't just sit around pondering their identity. It's a weird thing to do.
Right.
But if more people could get in that habit of just periodically saying, what stories have I been telling about myself that are unhealthy for me? And how can I move out of that? Then a lot more people would become aware of the ways that they're not serving themselves.
Don't you need help? I mean, isn't it good to have help?
Yes, it's always good to have
I mean,
help.
if you get stuck, like, because I think that people think about it certainly more than they talk about it, which is kind of what you're saying. But I think people think about it a lot, but they don't talk about it very much. Like, who am I? Or, is this really me? Or what? I just remember when my wife's business, well, she became a mom for one thing.
Yeah.
And then she wanted to put more time into being a mom. Mm-hmm. And so when she did that, she was putting less time into her business, and her business wasn't the same.
Yeah.
And that was really hard for her for a while.
Yeah.
And then she realized, but I'm a mom.
Yeah.
And I want to be a mom more than I want to be this business huge person in photography and stuff like that. And that was tough for her. It was what was happening, and it is what she wanted. And it was still hard because in a way she was kind of saying goodbye to that person that she always was. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, and I'm completely obsessed with the idea of grieving for yourself and learning how to go through cycles of grief.
It was grief.
Yourself. Yeah, it is. I know, because I am also going through that right now. I just became a mom, and I am completely lost in my identity, but I know that, and I'm actively grieving that.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, I became a foster mother 2 months ago, and I think that no matter what anybody tells you, you're always going to have your own experience of what that's like.
Yes.
Parenthood or any big
Thank
change.
you.
And so I, being the analytical person that I am, knew this change was coming. So I batch created 6 months of content so that I would have 4 things to put out on the internet per week for 6 months. Mm-hmm. And even in that, even in being so prepared and feeling like my business is just going to keep sailing, I'm shocked at how lost I feel in my own identity when I can't just sit down at my computer and work or get an idea out. And that has been massively frustrating because my business and largely my identity has been built on this spontaneous creativity. And that's what people know me for, is
because
for just doing it.
Because you could.
Because I could, yeah.
And now you can't.
And now I can definitely not.
Certainly not in the same way.
No.
By any means.
Yeah. I've found that when you're out on a photo shoot and you're trying to play dead in a field, it's very hard when you have a 2-year-old running into the street. It's it's amazing. So, things have been stifled for sure. And it's been a tough challenge. But at the same time, the benefit of understanding that you're in a cycle of grief is that you can also look forward and figure out how to get out of that a lot easier if you're aware of it. And so I'm already thinking about, well, how can I use this to my benefit? It's a funny thing that I am trying to play dead while my 2-year-old is running toward the street, right? It's funny. Don't worry, he's not in harm. It's funny.
We don't want to get those emails.
And it's interesting, and people will relate to that. Yeah. And so I know that. And so I'm already thinking, well, my old persona has to die because my life is different now. Yeah. But I can transition that spirit that I had into new stories and new ways of existing, and that's equally good. So I'm really working on that right now.
I understand that you have the grief on one end. Talk a little bit about the joy on the other end.
It's been a really funny balance for me of that, because to be honest, this whole journey into fostering has been not what I expected. And I've had a lot of conversations with my husband about this, about expectation versus reality and what you think is going to happen versus what really is occurring in your house. Yes. And I think that part of Like, I know you just said talk about the joy, and now I'm talking about something entirely else.
Joy doesn't mean happiness, though.
No, it doesn't.
So I'm not asking you to talk about the happy stuff.
Right. And I guess that's my point, which is that we've had these conversations about expectation. And in those conversations, I've recognized what I wanted out of this experience versus what I have. And having to very intentionally say, I won't give this up because I'm learning so much about myself and about the world by going through this experience that's its own type of joy for me.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That.
It's not, I wake up every day and I'm not wildly happy and I have really hard days. I mean, I have a 2-year-old with a lot of trauma issues, so it's difficult.
Right.
And there are so many moments where I think, like, I did this to myself and I did this willingly and it's awful and I hate my life right in this moment. But then when I come out of that, I think, but I'm helping this child so much, and I know that. And there are moments of extreme happiness that I'm having in my house, and I get to learn from this. And then even if nothing else comes of my journey as a parent, I'm going to create amazing art from that. So that's also really awesome.
Well, and do you have a sense that it's to some degree that your joy is going to be retrospective?
In so many ways.
Yes.
And I think that, like, people always say, like, look at that time in your life. You didn't even know it, but those were the best years.
Right.
And I always feel that every day I think that to myself, like, okay, he's had a tantrum for an hour and I'm freaking out. But, like, I also get to hug him during that moment. And I'm going to miss that so much when he gets reunited with his biological family.
Yes.
And so I'm having a lot of moments where I think, don't worry. In a year, I'm going to really miss this.
Well, you will. There's no question. How do you handle that inevitability coming up?
It's really challenging, and it's also not challenging. So, like, when I started, everybody said to me, you're going to get so attached to that child, and you're not going to want to give him up.
Right.
And I actually found my attachment to be very slow. And I just hated myself more than anything for weeks when I started fostering.
Is that right?
Because I didn't feel an attachment. I didn't feel anything. I just felt like there's a stranger in my house and I don't know how to take care of him and it's really frustrating. And I didn't feel that. And I think that, like, the stigma around any parent, really, and especially motherhood, is that you'll just feel this unending, undying love for your child.
Right. Yeah.
And I did not feel that way. And I think that part of it is knowing that he'll go back to his family. So there's just a built-in resistance for me of like, I know I'm going to lose this child. And then, but there are other moments where I just think I can never give this child up. Like, how am I going to send him back to his family?
Gosh.
And I don't know. It's just really hard. And I haven't analyzed my feelings about this enough to, like, have an intelligent conversation.
Well, you're in it right now.
I'm very much in it.
This isn't retrospective, this piece. You're in it.
Yes.
Right now.
Yeah. And a couple people have asked me, and I keep almost saying, I can't talk about this yet because I don't know.
I get it.
But I'm happy to try because this is how I process my thoughts. So it's good, but I'm just sorry that everyone has to listen to my processed thoughts.
Well, no, I think it's really
thoughts.
helpful for me to hear you say that you struggled with hating yourself at first because that for whatever reason you weren't reacting in a way that you expected or that you feel everyone told you that you would, right? I remember when we adopted my daughter and we found out that we weren't going to be able to bring her home. That was in Nepal 10 years ago almost. And I remember it was like a defense mechanism that I don't know if it was there already and I just turned it on or if I constructed it real fast. I don't know how that happened, but I do remember in my mind, and this is kind of a confession that I'm going to say, inspired by what you were just talking about. I said to myself, I am not going to fall in love with this little girl. I'm not going to allow it because I'm going to have to leave her here. Like, we can't bring her home. This isn't going to happen. And maybe she's never going to be, living with us.
Right.
And it was like the process of like 3 or 4 days while we were there. And I think day 4 or day 5, I didn't have a choice. In as much as I had this piece of me that was fighting it, I didn't have a choice. I completely fell for this little girl.
Yeah.
And at that point, it was like, I don't care if we have to move here. Because they were telling us, take her back to the orphanage
Yeah.
and go home.
Right.
That is what the United States official stance was to us and the rest of the families that were
Right.
there. And I held that little girl that night, that's when it dawned on me. That's not even an option for me.
Right.
But I fought it initially because in order to protect myself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because I knew that it was a devastating situation.
Yep.
And so I had that constructed.
Yeah.
And it
So
was
hard.
so hard. Terribly hard.
Yeah. Do you ever get to a point where you feel like you have no more to learn about yourself? Like you've done so much digging that you're like, I feel like I've reached the bottom.
I get to the point where I don't want to dig anymore.
Sure. Well, that's how I felt before my journey into parenthood. And then we went to go pick up my son, and I, for days, I didn't sleep. I just shook. I was so scared. I was so anxious. I was so upset. And I just felt like it was never going to go away. It lasted for a week. I basically didn't sleep for a week. I just couldn't. I was crying constantly.
Yeah.
And I just felt like, wow, I really have a lot more to learn about myself. And even that was inspiring in that moment of like, well, the silver lining is that, I've got a lot more depth that I need to explore, and
There's
this is
a lot
going to really
more.
help me.
Yeah, there's
do
a
that.
lot more there.
Yeah.
I applaud you. I just think that you're such a special, unique person because of your maybe ability, but even willingness to speak honestly about things. Like when I asked you the difficult question before and you said, I don't know.
Yeah.
That was so good.
I feel like sometimes that's all you can say.
So this would normally be the part that I didn't even, this is like the part that I would say after the podcast was over, but I wanted to tell you while we were still recording. Wrap it up for me in a bit of a formal way and just tell people where they can find you and know more about you.
Yeah. So I'm all over the internet. I love it. And so I have my website, brookeshaden.com, and I'm on Instagram a lot. My handle is just Brooke Shaden. And I share a lot of content.
You share a lot.
Yeah, just a lot of heartfelt feelings and behind the scenes content and editing and all sorts of stuff. So
Thank you for joining me, Brooke.
thank you.
It was great to see you.
Oh, I just love you.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this conversation presented by White House Custom Color on YouTube. Be sure to check out our other content and click that subscribe button right there. Right. Right there. It's there somewhere.